Coming up in this episode on Follow Him.
When he did come to Utah, he went to see Brigham Young. By this point, Thomas B. Marsh has had some really severe health problems and suffers from palsy. As Brigham's seeing him after 18 years, he at first doesn't seem to recognize him. He asks Thomas to speak, and Thomas speaks, and then Brigham says, "Truly it is you."
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Follow Him. My name is Hank Smith. I'm your host. I'm here with my co-host, whose heart is full of good cheer. Now, John, you can't disagree with that one. You disagree every week, but this one, you can't disagree.
I try to have a native cheery temperament. I heard that someplace.
You do. I have known you, it's over 15 years, John, since we first met, and very rarely have I seen you not of good cheer. It's happened once or twice, but very, very little.
I've been real tired.
Yeah. Hey, John, it is a privilege today to have back on the show Dr. Susan Easton Black. Susan, welcome back to Follow Him.
Thank you. It's great to be with both of you again. I love your show. Love what you're doing.
That voice, I guarantee, is now familiar to so many who are listening.
Yeah.
John, how many times, I know this has happened to me, honestly, I can't even count. When I tell people, they'll say, "Where do you work?" And I'll say, "Oh, I work in the religious education department at BYU." "Do you know Susan Easton?" I had Susan Easton Black as a church history professor. That class changed my life, changed everything. Yes, I've heard that before. And yes, I know Susan.
Yeah, and she could get up and speak without notes about the prophet Joseph Smith for hours.
Hours.
It's always inspiring.
The best of the best, honestly.
Yeah, you are a treasure.
Thank you. Well, big blessing. You had the great subject material. How can with Joseph Smith, how great is that?
Yeah. John, we finished last week with the dedication of the Kirtland Temple, Dr. Anthony Sweat. We hinted at the fact that things change after the dedication. What do you think of when you think post-temple dedication in Kirtland?
I know both of you have had this experience where you leave the temple, you're on a wonderful spiritual plane, and then maybe you get a text that says, "Hey, you owe Intermountain Healthcare $300. That happened to me yesterday. Suddenly I don't want to say back to the real world, because somebody said that leaving the temple to Elder Groberg, and he said, "Wrong. The real world is in here. That world's temporary. That world's going to end. But this is the real world here in the temple." That's what I think of, because we just left 110. We just left the Savior appearing. Then here comes the finances and everything else as they go to 111. So there's kind of a contrast between those two.
Susan, as you've looked at these sections in this time period, what are we going to do today?
I think everybody will really like today. I think they'll feel like they can really relate.
Yeah.
Each one of the sections we're talking about, somebody has a concern, somebody has a worry. Like you said, section 111, Joseph Smith is worried about finances. By section 12, Thomas B. Marsh is worried about the quorum of the 12. Not all of them are keeping the commandments. I always find it interesting. He never includes himself in that thought. But then 113, you get Elias Higbee and others are worried about doctrine. And they pick something random out of Isaiah, 2 different chapters. Then the last, you get David W. Patton wondering how really can he go on a mission and be ready to go. He's got merchandise. He's got things that are going on in his life. How much is he willing to sacrifice? I think you asked me because you knew I could really worry and teach everyone how to do that.
You could relate to having worries?
Yes. Everyone is concerned. Answers are forthcoming, which I think is wonderful.
Mm-hmm. As I was preparing, I thought of Moses chapter 1. Moses has this incredible experience with the Lord, and then it came to pass that Moses looked upon Satan. Satan came tempting him. It does seem that this darkness follows. I'm sure you both know this. Moses continues to fight through that darkness. John, I am convinced that everyone listening knows Susan. However, there may be a new member of the church who is thinking, wait, who? Why don't you give us a little bit of a background? We honestly could take an hour to do this, so you're going to have to give us the highlights.
Yeah, she was raised in Long Beach, California. I've always wanted to be raised in something that had beach in the title. That just sounds really nice. The Great Salt Lake Beach doesn't do it. But anyway, Long Beach, she was the first woman to teach in religious education at BYU. She also was the first woman to receive the Carl G. Mazur Distinguished Faculty Award for her research and writing. We don't want to embarrass you, but that's our highest award given a professor at Brigham Young University. I mean, I couldn't even get a key to a part-time office, but they gave her that.
Okay.
She taught at BYU for 38 years. She's a guest lecturer and instructor now at Utah Valley University. She's written over 150 books. 150 books.
I don't know if I've read that many, John.
Here's one of them right here. She served 2 missions for the Historic Sites Department, a mission as a psychologist for LDS Social Services, a mission to the Nauvoo, Illinois Temple, a mission to the St. George Temple Visitor Center, and a mission to the Priesthood and Family Department of the church. Kim asked me this morning, are you recording today? Who have you got? And I said, Susan Easton Black. And she went, oh, because she's told me she had her at BYU a long time ago and could sit there and listen for hours.
Yeah. I've heard the same thing, John.
Let's not talk today. Let's let Susan talk.
Yeah. John, I'm going to give a little challenge here. If anybody listening had Susan as a professor and would like to leave her a message, come over to YouTube, leave a message there. We'll make sure they all get to Susan. If you were born in the 1900s and you don't know what YouTube is, you can come over to our website, followhim.co. You can leave us a message there, and we'll make sure all of these get to Susan. Susan, honestly, 38 years at BYU, that's thousands of students.
Thousands of students, but always the best students.
Yeah, we're unbiased, but yeah. Before we leave some background here, John, just so you know, Susan doesn't spend all of her time reading and writing. With all that she's done, she is a master pickleball player. And before that, ping pong. She just expanded from ping pong to pickleball.
Tell us about your latest pickleball achievement. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's a real achievement, but I did play in the Stadium of Fire pickleball tournament. For the 1 or 2 of us there, I came in third.
Third place for the 1 or 2 of us.
I do like the game. It's very fun. I have the philosophy, use it or lose it, and you got to move.
Got to keep moving.
John, with all that you read and all that we've learned, I don't know of a person who does more. This is the way she is, John. She's full of life.
Hey, thank you. Sure glad I showed up today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, you're right. We need to let Susan teach. I'll jump into the Come Follow Me manual and we'll turn it over to her. The lesson is sections 111 through 114. The title is I Will Order All Things for Your Good. The manual starts this way. Have you ever had a spiritual experience that made you feel confident and secure in your faith in Christ, but then life's afflictions tried your faith and you found yourself struggling to recover the peace you felt before? Something similar happened to the saints in Kirtland. Less than a year after the spiritual outpourings connected with the dedication of the Kirtland Temple, troubles arose. A financial crisis, conflict in the Quorum of the 12, and other trials caused some saints to waver in their faith despite their earlier experiences. We can't avoid trials, so how can we keep them from threatening our faith and testimony? Maybe part of the answer can be found in the Lord's counsel in section 112. Given while adversity in Kirtland was swelling, the Lord said, "Purify your hearts before me. Rebel not. Gird up thy loins for the work, and be thou humble." As we follow this counsel, the Lord will lead us by the hand through adversity and into healing and peace. Beautiful. Susan, I think we're ready to go. I noticed that section 111 is in Massachusetts. Section 112 is in Ohio. Section 113 does not give a location. We are all over the map here.
All over the map.
You're in for a geography lesson, right?
Right. Yeah. Susan, how do we want to start?
Okay, well, I'd like to tell everyone about Salem, Massachusetts. You realize it's named after the royal city of Melchizedek so long ago. Salem, Massachusetts was one of our early cities in America, being founded in 1626. But I think for most of us, the reason we know so much about Salem, Massachusetts is, remember, they had the witch trials. So in 1692, there's a history of witchcraft. So it's 70 years after the town is founded. Some friends, all female, got together. They started doing what the townsfolk called witchcraft. What they did was so simple. They merely got what was called Venice glass, and it was a mirror, and they got an egg, and they would spin the egg. For that, there was a trial, and 19 of this group, for preaching they thought what they were learning from this spinning egg, were literally hung until dead. And you'd think that most towns would want to push that down and hide it. But Salem, Massachusetts has made a big deal out of it. So, for example, today they have an elementary school called Witchcraft Heights. They have a knoll in town they call Gallows Hill. On their police cars, they have witches. They've made kind of a big deal about they are the witch hunt town. And then we say, well, Joseph, what are you doing there? When obviously most of the church is in Kirtland and some have moved on to Missouri. You with your brother Hiram and Sidney and Oliver have left literally the body of the church and gone to what by that point was called the largest, well, it was the 6th largest town in the United States, but it was a seaport that will soon be passed by Boston and New York City. What's he doing out there? The answer goes like this. It's almost as odd as the witch hunts itself. Joseph Smith is struggling. What he's struggling with is indebtedness. The issue is that at that temple dedication and prior to that, people from the north and east were contributing finances to the building of the temple. But once the temple was dedicated, finances dried up. Then you add to the issue, people in Kirtland have been asked to give money to the poor and bleeding in Missouri. Financially, the church, via Joseph Smith, is being hit two ways. One is we still have lots of bills to pay on the Kirtland Temple. Two, there are still poor and bleeding in Missouri that are trying to now get out of Clay County and work their way to far west in Caldwell County. Issues are big. And at this point, there's a convert to the church, and his last name is Burgess. And this Jonathan Burgess tells Joseph Smith and other church leaders that he knows of a widow who's now died, but she has a house, and it's in Salem, Massachusetts, and in the cellar of the house, there's some buried treasure. Now, we'd look at it today and we go, we wouldn't buy into it. At least we hope not. But Joseph is looking for, where are their options? Where can I get money? Notice this is before the Kirtland Safety Society. This is his first attempt to pay off the bills. And the result will be is that Joseph now is heading out to Salem, Massachusetts. And notice verse 1, I, the Lord, your God, am not displeased with your coming this journey. In other words, it's okay. You brought Hiram, Sidney, Oliver, notwithstanding your follies. In other words, come on, Joseph, I see this as follies, but then the Lord is saying that he has much treasure in this city. Well, eventually Burgess leaves and heads back to Kirtland. But then you look, Joseph stays out there, and he stays out there a month with his friends. And they try to find the house. And finally, they figured out where the house is located, but they find that people are living in it. They don't know, can they rent it? Can they buy in it? Can they get in to get the treasure, the Lord then gives us revelation, telling Joseph that there are treasures in this town. We find by 1843, they've formed members of the church. There's over 100 of them in Salem that missionaries have gone there. And then the other big treasure, of course, is their family genealogy that was being kept there, as well as any other place, and in many cases better. That the treasures is knowing who lived there and who lived there and who lived there.
Susan, someone might say, this is a crazy idea to go get money here. But, I mean, Joseph Smith's a human being. I can think of, in my life, how many ideas I've thought, I wonder if that will work. And it completely backfired. There's listeners out there who probably every one of us can go, oh yeah, I remember that dumb idea. I lost a lot on that idea. I'll be vulnerable here, John. One time I bought a stock. It was a penny stock. You know, it's a penny. It's going to go up to $40. It kept going up. I bought it at its highest point. John, I am good. I am so good. From the moment I bought it, it never went up again, and it went down to zero. I know this might seem like a way to criticize these men, but they're human beings. We've all done something like this where we thought, maybe this will work out financially.
I just like almost the tone of voice of the Lord. I'm not displeased with you, notwithstanding your follies. It sounds like I'm shaking my head up here, but I'm not displeased. I know what you were trying to do. Maybe I can turn this for some good. As you mentioned, Susan, was it Robert Smith and his genealogy that was here, an ancestor of Joseph?
Right. You'd say, how did they spend their time when they were looking for the house? They're preaching. They're telling the people about the church. They're acting the part as missionaries, the seeds that they planted for others who came thereafter. But I relate. I think sometimes we really go off on a tangent, and it's not the right tangent, but at least we're moving.
Right. Doing something.
At some point, we get reined back in, but I like the Lord is not angry. It's not like he's being really rebuked. Perhaps we can feel like it will be okay with us too.
It's okay, even though not the best idea, but let's turn this into something useful.
It's kind of like, Hank, your penny stock thing. Okay, Hank, what have you learned? Kind of, okay, I'm not angry, but I'm always concerned that you're learning and growing. So what have you learned by this? You know, I like that tone of voice.
Yeah, me too.
I liked that the Lord will deal mercifully with his children. Sometimes I think we're too hard on ourselves. We're all trying. Maybe someone should write the song, Try, Try, Try. This is an example of Joseph trying to solve actually a big problem that's an important problem that does need a solution. I like his effort, but eventually you get, be thou humble, and the Lord thy God will lead thee by the hand. In other words, smart as you're being, your follies, it's time to be humble.
Yeah. There's a better way to go about this. I can see the Lord saying, why don't we try my way? John, what scripture is it where he says, your way is like a purse with holes, where you put your stuff in and it just falls out.
And it all falls out. Yeah.
Let's consider my way.
I like this one, verses 1 and 2, where he says, I have much treasure in this city. Truly, the history in the city is amazing. For you, for the benefit of Zion. And you wonder if we have really reaped all of that treasure yet. He says, and many people in this city whom I will gather out in due time for the benefit of Zion through your instrumentality. In other words, what the Lord is saying is that people are the treasures. Sometimes we look beyond the mark. We don't realize the greatness in the individuals that we actually interact with. And then he says, verse 3, therefore it is expedient that you should form acquaintance with men in this city, as you shall be led, as it shall be given you. I think that is with us. Instead of walking through town, just going to the market, head down, let's do it fast. Taking the time to make an acquaintance, ask a question, can reap its rewards now or later.
What is it that President Monson always said? Never let a problem to be solved become more important than a person to be loved. Joseph has a problem that needs to be solved, but doesn't see the treasure is actually in the people. I love it. Where should we go next?
Okay. Well, let's do 11. Wherefore, be ye as wise as serpents, and yet without sin. You think of the serpent with Eve, and you go, hey, we got to be as wise as the serpents, but do it without sin. And I will order all things for your good, as fast as you're able to receive them. Amen.
That verse 11 has been a fallback verse for me. Hank, as you know, I was 33 years old the day I got married, so I fulfilled all my eligibility as a YSA, and then I became an SA. That verse became very important to me. I don't know if everyone can apply it the same way. I'm looking at this whole section. I am not displeased. Listen to the pronouns. Verse 2, I have much treasure. Verse 2, I will gather. Verse 4, I will give. Verse 5, I will give you power. Verse 6, I will deal mercifully. Verse 11, I will order all things for your good. I thought I had the right order and sequence for things. Hear the Lord saying, well, actually, I will do that. I will order all things for your good as fast as ye are able. I figure that he is a really good judge of when I'm able. That was a fallback verse for me as a young single adult, that the Lord's saying, I've got this. I will order all things. I will judge if you're able to receive them yet.
And what good is it if I'm going to give you something that you're not able to receive?
Yeah.
Susan, you could, out of the three of us at least, and I'm sure out of a lot more than that, could get into Joseph Smith's head here. I mean, he's only 31, or he's going to be 31 soon. When he leaves Massachusetts, what has he learned?
I think he's learned that the Lord is in charge. He's perhaps remembering those days with Josiah stole and the treasures, the money diggers at that time period. He reverted back to something that he had tried in his youth, and it didn't work then, it doesn't work now. And it's kind of like the Lord, he doesn't chasten him, but he lets him go through the follies, almost like history repeats itself and we fall back to what we've done as children. And the Lord may be testing him again to see, will you really listen to me? And as John said, let me help order that life for you. I will give you what you need. And eventually we do know that those debts were paid off, but it will take years even after Joseph has left Kirtland, as you get Oliver Granger and others asked to stay behind and to pay off those debts. And even you get Brigham Young years later. At one point, he literally advertised wherever Joseph had gone, including Salem, Massachusetts, saying, if you knew a man named Joseph Smith and you have aught against him, if you felt like he owes you money, his debt is my debt. Brigham Young will make sure that all of those debts are covered. And once he has done that, he says, now I will be worthy to meet the prophet Joseph again. In other words, this order that we're talking about, it may occur in our lifetime or thereafter as you get those who emulate the prophet Joseph and themselves serve as a prophet, want to make sure that no one has aught against him over any kind of financial issue.
I love that. I had not connected Josiah Stoll and the silver mine, but I can see a little bit of him going, oh, wait, what if there is a...
What if we try this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember this. Yeah.
Reminds me of Elder Holland when he talked about the resurrected Christ is there in Galilee. And Peter says, I go a-fishing. And he's like, Peter, why are we here having the same discussion?
Yeah, similar.
Peter, do you love me? Oh, yeah. Then why are we back here?
Why are we here? You're supposed to be a fisher of men now. Yeah.
If I needed fish, I can get fish.
I can get fish. I love that part of the talk.
Oh, wow. What a great connection, John and Susan. Thank you for that. I love the humanity of Joseph Smith.
He's only 31.
Yeah. He's a kid. Do you remember thinking, 30 was old?
Yeah, I used to.
Yeah. He's young and maybe this will work. By the way, why don't I take all the leadership of the church with me away from the church? Right? I can see the Lord going, okay, well, with still some things to learn. Susan, anything else about 111 do you want to talk about?
I think it's interesting that 111, notice how quick, if we harken back to what we first talked about, but you get April 3rd, then 1836, and now we're August 6th. April, May, June, July, August. It only takes about 4 months or so for suddenly things to start unraveling. Typically, we think of when you're on a high, you're really moving on that high. But you got to be careful. You got to be grounded. You got to know what you stand for.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Coming out of this Kirtland Temple experience, everything's going to be good from here on out. Nothing could go wrong. Let's go try this.
Now, some of the biggest trials await him.
Susan, as we move forward into 112, I noticed something. We go from section 111, August 6th, 1836, to section 112, July of 1837. We are almost a year without a published revelation in our Doctrine and Covenants. I don't think this has ever happened before up to this point. As anybody at home is reading, they notice that there's probably a lot in that little tiny space on the page here between 111 and 112. What happens?
It's a very difficult year for Joseph Smith. One of the ways they learned about some letters they claimed were Joseph's handwriting, but ultimately found they were forged. It was because Joseph's handwriting, prior to where we're at during that year, you'd look at it and he's shaking all over the places he writes his J and the O and the S. And the forgers didn't pick that up. You'd say, well, Joseph, why are you shaking? What's going on? Well, actually, it's still indebtedness. They don't have a solution for it. Well, the next idea they come up with was, let's form a bank. We'll call it the Kirtland Safety Society. We've got an idea for this bank. We're going to send Orson Hyde to the legislature there in Ohio, and we'll send Oliver Cowdery. We'll send you to get plates made back east. The legislature voted no. It wasn't like we were the only group trying to set up a bank, but we didn't have the funds to set up the bank, the principals. So instead, we did form a group that acted the part of a bank. We even had a building on Temple Square, but we called it the Kirtland Safety Society no, we're really not a bank, anti-banking company, but they acted the part of a bank. They actually formed a stock company. You get 205 Latter-day Saints, get stock from that company, and eventually you're going to see, well, it's starting to fall apart. But eventually, as you look at the United States, you got 26 states, and it starts in New York. There's a run on the banks, and banks begin to collapse all over the states, including the Kirtland Safety Society. But when the society finally collapses, the average investor is getting back 12.5 cents on every dollar they put in the bank. Do you remember when we all had roommates? You'd come home and you'd go, where's my sweater? I just bought some milk. My cereal is gone. Money among friends, difficult money that's got the prophet's name on it. Sidney Rigdon, very, very difficult. Suddenly you get on the streets of Kirtland, the gossip, talk, and eventually leads to great persecution and Joseph having to pretty much flee for his life. The word on the street is Joseph Smith, fallen prophet. You'd look and you'd say, what's going on in that year? I say a pretty tough time for the church. Those that are good really rise up and defend the prophet. As we move on to section 112, you're going to get Thomas B. Marsh is very worried. Here's the concern again about members in his quorum that are starting to say Joseph Smith, fallen prophet, William McClellan, John Boynton.
These are apostles.
Luke and Lyman Johnson. You get apostles that are starting to waver. Even Parley P. Pratt at one point, as he writes his autobiography, says, these were my darkest days. As you get this wavering, trying to decide as they're choosing sides. For Joseph Smith, I like this quote. He says, no quorum in the church was entirely exempt from the influence of those false spirits who are striving against me for the mastery. Even some of the 12 were so far lost to their high and responsible calling as to begin to take sides. Kirtland goes from united at the temple dedication. Never could there have been a happier people.
Right.
Yeah.
Then you'd say, what goes on in this year? Wow, the money thing, the divisions, are very difficult as families split apart. Apostasy is everywhere. People are choosing sides. Churches are forming from our church. In other words, very, very difficult time, and especially very difficult for Joseph Smith, who still got the problems we talked about. You know, in section 111, he's still got bills for the Kirtland Temple. He's still got money that's being sent now as they're trying to form a new town there in Far West. Very, very difficult.
Yeah. Oh, it's almost like Fourth Nephi. Starts out so great and then ends so
but
sad.
It's only a few pages. Did you notice? Yeah. And then boom, we're back to wars.
Susan, let me ask you a question that I get sometimes, which is how can people who have had such incredible experiences, you think Kirtland Temple, then you get the Johnsons, Boynton, and even Parley. How can people go from that to, you know what, I don't think Joseph is a prophet. I've lost confidence. How did this person go from there to here?
For some of us, it's because we don't write down our spiritual experiences and our feelings of what happened. You know, it becomes something where you say, well, here's what I remember, but it's lost out there somewhere. But in the case of John F. Boynton, I really like this man. He was the only college graduate to serve in the quorum of the 12. He's your only guy to have attended college. He had majored in science and actually went on to become a very famous scientist in the United States. The fire extinguisher, he is credited with making that. He also helped create the torpedo, which still defends our shores. He married a wife after his first wife died in a hot air balloon going over New York City, the first man to do that. I mean, he's got all kinds of things. He lifted up an object. A ship had sunk off the coast in San Francisco, and he invented a levee system that we still use, the same levee system, parts of it today, to lift large objects out of bodies of water. But you'd say John F. Boynton, he was called to the quorum of the 12 as a bachelor. Some of our listeners may want to hold out, right? For Boynton, what happened to him, he found a woman to marry. They were married by the prophet Joseph Smith, one of the first people he married there in Kirtland, Ohio. But you'd say for Boynton, he was one of the principals of the Kirtland Safety Society. He didn't have a lot of money as he goes into the society, but he's one of the original principals. He and Lyman Johnson sent for merchandise back east with the idea they were going to make a fortune and be able to pay for the merchandise when it arrives from the money which they had made as principals for the Kirtland Safety Society. Well, when the society falls apart, they're sitting with all this merchandise and they say, Joseph, a fallen prophet. You might find it of interest that John F. Boynton eventually goes into the Kirtland Temple. He has a pistol, threatens Father Smith. Difficult things happen for him. And then finally he says, I say goodbye to religion. He never returns to religion, although he does come out at Brigham Young's request. He gives a series of lectures at Temple Square in Salt Lake City. For 3 weeks, you could listen to his idea for making different kinds of buttons, tar roofs, things like that. Or you could watch perhaps our relatives laboriously build on the Salt Lake Temple, which
Wow.
we do. He was a guest of Brigham Young there in the Lion House. Brigham Young asked him to stay and said there wasn't anybody in the church like him. In other words, he had dozens of patents to his name. We're still living in log cabins, and Boynton's a genius out there. He said no and went back home and died in Syracuse. He was smart in his time, and his name went up in neon lights. He's the most recognized Latter-day Saint during the time of Brigham Young because he's giving lectures all over the U.S. about his scientific experiments. Then you look at the Johnsons. They all go back to Father Johnson. Remember Hiram, Ohio? You go, okay, Johnsons, what happened to you guys? They started out good enough to obviously be named in the Quorum of the 12 on February 14th, 1835 with the rest of them. When they come in the quorum, their family is pretty well-to-do. They are principals there in that Kirtland Society. The Johnsons had not known what it was like to be poor. Suddenly, the society falls apart, and their lives are dramatically different. As their lives become different, they conclude they will stay behind as the church moves on to Missouri and try and recoup their fortune. They never do. Finally, if we take them separate, Luke Johnson comes back to the church after about 8 years. He's tired of eating the corn husks. He's ready to be part, and he is selected by Brigham Young to settle out in Tooele, which you wonder how much Brigham Young really liked him. And he becomes a sheriff and very famous. People liked him. And for Lyman Johnson, he ends up in Michigan. He dies a horrible drowning accident there as he's on a toboggan heading out into the lake. Stories are filled with tragedy, but the place where they're making a decision is right where we're talking about Doctrine and Covenants 112. Which way will you go? We always think like the rod of iron, we can fall off either way. We can fall off because we're underzealot. I get that one. And we don't keep the commandments. That's what Thomas B. Marsh is worried about. Hey, I've got members of my quorum not keeping the commandments. Or we can fall off because we're overzealot, like the case of William McClellan, who forms his own church. And you're like, wait a minute. The blessings are in the center. You got to hold on. You can't listen to voices on either side. You got to make your stand in holy places. Be a credit to yourself, to your family, to the Lord. Thomas, I think, is so interesting. He's worried about those in his quorum, but he's never looking at himself. I have wondered that as a mom. You look at your kids and you're like, come on. Remember where you were raised, what you can do. I had someone say to me, your children didn't turn out perfect. And I've had an occasion to say, well, for sure not. Look who raised them. How would it be possible to have them absolutely perfect, but aren't they wonderful? They all are that. But I relate to Thomas's worries. At the same time, he perhaps needed to look at himself.
Wow. It can happen to any of us. Sometimes you think, I've seen so much, I've felt so much, it could never happen to me. I would never have doubts. I would never fall away. But that's Safety Society. If I lost everything, if I lost my net worth, which isn't great, but if I lost it all, I don't know, would it cause me to start to doubt and start to question everything I had once experienced?
I know, Hank, you like to talk about false expectations. Well, if he's the president of the church, he must be really good at banking too. Or if he says, let's do this bank, maybe that's a pure revelation or something.
It's a revelation, yeah.
Therefore, it's got to work. Maybe that was saying that if he's a prophet, he's going to be perfect in everything he puts his hand to. They're saying, well, he was a prophet at one time. The Book of Mormon is still true, but he's a fallen prophet now. Is that kind of where they're going, or do they leave completely?
That's where you're going. You get your first break-off church. We call him that. They believe Joseph was a prophet, but now so-and-so was a man named Wycombe Clark in 1831. And by the time of Joseph's death, you've had 9 different men have risen up and saying Joseph was a prophet. Now it's me. We just need to be careful. I remember at one point when Thomas B. Marsh comes back to the church after 18 years. During those 18 years, I had an occasion to follow his life through these random libraries. During those 18 years, he tried to support himself as a school teacher. Now, we can all speak to the folly of that. But you'd say, for him, his favorite class to teach was biblical geography. And that's a tough class to have kids like, but especially if you've never seen it. You've never been over there. But when Thomas B. Marsh comes back into the church, he announces to the people, "Oh, I've suffered all these things. Thank you, welcome me back." And he promises that he will never fall again. Brigham Young then stands up and says, "I have to pray every day that I will be faithful." You look at the two men, wow, you got to make a stand and you go, hey, this is what I'm willing to do. So we end up on the Lord's side.
John, I think this might be just a good little time to shout out to our friend Ashley Stone, who does what's called the Comeback podcast. I was interviewed on that podcast. It is spectacular. What she's doing is exactly what we're talking about today, inviting people who have left to come back. I like what you said there, Susan. Between section 111 and 112, I wrote, this is a decision point for so many. How many people leave? Some people call this the Kirtland apostasy.
The tragedy of Shinehaw, which Shinehaw was a code name for Kirtland.
Okay.
At one point, I wrote 50 volumes, 48,000 pages on everyone that knew Joseph Smith.
Okay.
If George were a funner person, I wouldn't have to do that. But when you look at it, I then went through and did all the statistics on it. You're a less than 50% chance you're going to hang in there unless you do make those choices, if you look at the early saints.
Isn't that something? Wow.
Such a trying time.
I'm still stuck on 48,000 pages. Oh, my goodness. In fact, I remember once in Nauvoo, off on a tangent for a minute, mentioning I had an ancestor, and Susan said, "Who's that?" And I said his name was Samuel Alexander Pagan Kelsey. And Susan went, "Oh, yeah, okay, yeah."
I know him.
Because she knows these people.
Well, I do love them.
Yeah, I don't want to get off Kirtland, sorry, but I just thought that was amazing that you have this database in your brain. I was amazed how many young people listen to Follow Him, Hank. I was at Education Week, and you listen? You do? You know, do you watch or do you listen? But anyway, what does it mean for a bank to fail? They've probably seen It's a Wonderful Life, but how could we explain what happens when a bank fails? It's not backed by gold or silver. Is that what happened?
Right. So this was a time that banks weren't backed by gold or silver. And just as an aside, we know about Nauvoo and they have 38 general stores, and I could just go off, but they never establish a bank. They have hotels, they have mills, they have dress shops, whatever it is, but there's no bank. I think this Kirtland Safety Society had a real impact, but at that time in the United States, paper money was only as good as the principals of the bank. In other words, the people who were in the bank, and money down the street would look different than money you got from other banks. And Kirtland Safety Society notes were hard to pass to other banks.
There wasn't a U.S. currency around. They didn't have George Washington on a dollar bill. Wasn't there a lot of bartering going on? I'll give you a couple of cows if you'll do this. And
right. You had something called long credit and short credit. So if I liked you, John, and I was confident you could pay me back, I'd give you long credit so you'd have more time to pay me back. If I didn't know you and you walked in, then I'd do short credit. What you'd probably find of interest today, you look and you'd say, women do the shopping. Women are at the malls. If the men are there, they're sitting in the middle trying to figure out what to do, waiting for their wife to come out of a store, right? But back then, men did the shopping because it was always bartering. By the end of the day, you could look and say, I was making a uniform shop, but by the end of the day, I've got apples, oranges, everything that I bartered with.
Weren't there some outside influences that were trying to make it fail, that bought up a bunch of shares and then came in and said, here's my shares, give me cash or something?
It wasn't until the banks began to close throughout the United States that you get that. It would be like us going in saying, here's my bank statement. I want the money. We all know at banks now, yeah, I want the whole balance. Banks now, you can say, I have this much money, but the banks then take it in the front door, push it out the back door for buying cars, houses. It was the same with the Kirtland Safety Society.
Yeah, that's why I think young people might not understand how a bank fails, but it's because that money isn't all sitting in a safe back there.
Yeah. It's loaned out to other people so they can go buy things, and then they'll pay interest on that, which the bank makes money. But, oh man, if everybody goes to get their money at the same time,
any bank's in trouble.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful life. But then Mr. Potter says 50 cents on the dollar. So people don't go to Potter. I just wondered if people wonder what that means for the Kirtland Safety Society to fail. Maybe they're okay. I just wondered.
And what does Jimmy Stewart say, John?
Don't you see? Potter's not selling, Potter's buying. No, we can get through this. We got to have faith in each other.
That was perfect.
That was great.
To anyone out there who wasn't born in the 1900s, they're going to think, is John okay? He's okay.
What's happened to his voice right there?
Yeah. That was really good. Susan, this apostasy, I'm thinking about the prophets, his own feelings of, these are friends.
You'd say amidst all the tragedies that's going on, something really miraculous happened, and it was about Heber C. Kimball. At this point, this time of great hardship, the Lord now reveals to the prophet Joseph that obviously they've got to do something for the salvation of the church as leaders are starting to fall. It would be at this point that the prophet Joseph now approaches Heber C. Kimball, a member of the Quorum of the 12, who's a potter by trade. Okay. He approaches him in the Kirtland Temple and he whispers to him and he says, Brother Heber, the Spirit of the Lord has whispered to me, let my servant Heber go to England and proclaim my gospel and open the door of salvation to that nation. Heber later wrote, the idea of such a mission was almost more than I could bear up under. I was almost ready to sink under the burden which was placed upon me. Nevertheless, he determined to go to England. He penned, the moment I understood the will of my heavenly Father, I felt a determination to go at all hazards. So you'd say, what's the salvation of what's going on in Kirtland? And I'd say, you ever heard the story of Heber C. Kimball? Within the year, you'd say, how did he do along with his associates that went with him? And you'd say, 1,500 joined the church. You try to balance it out, which we learned that if you're not willing to move the Lord's work forward, somebody will rise up and take your place.
Wow. I love that, Susan. Something good is happening. Even though you can't see it, it looks terrible for the church. Here you look, oh, wow, look at all that's happening. The church is being ruined, when actually the next wave of energy is coming across the Atlantic, right?
So much so that by the time Joseph will die out there in Carthage, you've got a fourth of Nauvoo is British born and bred. Like, for example, at one point, you'd say for Wilford Woodruff, he hasn't even been in England 60 days, and he's already baptized 600 people, including preachers from another church and a constable that comes to arrest him.
Yeah.
So you look and you'd say, they're coming in. It's like your next wave. It's your rescue wave coming to help the hands that hang down. You know, analogy in our lives. Just when we think life has taken a really tough turn, that the Crusaders are coming. They're boom, boom, they're marching on. They're coming to help those who have stood in their place but now need help, like Aaron and Ur helping Moses, right? They're going to hold up the arms and help you move forward and stay true to the faith. Anyway, always grateful for the English saints and for the courage of Heber C. Kimball that arrives on British shores. He actually jumps off the little dinghy that's taking him to shore so he can be the first missionary there in England. And then sees out there in Preston the political sign, truth will prevail, and amen. Truth will prevail despite the hardship that they've left behind.
I feel like this is the Lord ordering all things. It seems counterintuitive in a time of crisis to say, Heber, go across the ocean, instead of, Heber, I need you right now. I need you by my side. But instead he says, go across the ocean, and then later ends up sending almost all the 12 to the British Isles, which is amazing. But here's the Lord with the big picture ordering all things for them, as it said in 111.
Susan, if we focus in on 112, Thomas B. Marsh, we've heard of him before, but can you give us some background? He was an early convert.
Right. Thomas B. Marsh, he's a young man, actually runs away from home when he's about 14, ends up in New York City, becomes a grocer, and feels impressed that he should head out to Western New York. He gets out in Western New York. Gets off there in the Palmyra area, goes to the Grandin bookstore, and he finds just in the trash can 16 pages of the Book of Mormon that had been spoiled because maybe too much ink or something, so they weren't going to use them. He takes it home. He goes back to New York City. He gets his wife, family, and moves to Palmyra. He's a very early person that comes into the church. He was very faithful, and you go, well, how can you take somebody who's that faithful, that gives up everything, who's selected as the original president of the 12, who take the 12 with him on a mission to the eastern states, then you'd say gets this revelation in which he's being told, hey, love the 12. You're to preach the gospel. The word apostle means one who is sent. Get out there. If you're an apostle, he's sitting home too long. I like reading the church news. I want to know where are they going now. Elder Gong was in Provo here for Education Week. You look, and they're just all over the world. In a time when a lot of people may be more fearful to travel, they're on the go. But then you look and you'd say, Thomas, tell me it's going to be something big that would take you out. And I go, no, it's so simple. It's not until he moves to Far West. And we've all heard the story of his wife is sharing the milking duties with the next door neighbor, George Washington Harris's wife. The issue is all over cheese. So you realize it's a cholesterol story. It's bad from beginning to end. It's not going to work out good. But Mrs. Marsh, she's holding back a pint of the strippings where you can make better cheese from this milking of the cows. And it eventually leads to courts being held at the bishop level, the stake, and eventually to the prophet Joseph Smith. Each one of those conclude that, hey, it has the issue between the two women that really, if anybody's at fault, it's Thomas's wife. Thomas sides with his wife over the prophet Joseph. It's so simple. It should have been neighbors sitting down talking. You want more cheese? Good for you.
Oh, fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking to think, like you said, just a little spirit of humility and sit down. Let's work this out. I never knew it went to courts. Church courts, you mean?
And finally, Thomas will be the one that writes an affidavit and sends it to Lilburn W. Boggs, who Boggs is trying to figure out in 1838, which way do I go? Boggs gets this, and Brigham always said Thomas B. Marsh never shot anyone, but he did seem to pull the trigger on this one. Suddenly you get an extermination order against the saints, forcing them now out of the state of Missouri. Thomas, pretty difficult, but where we're at in this one, the 12 are told, verse 14, to arise, gird up their loins, take up their cross, follow Christ, feed his sheep. But they're told in 15, the 12 must be careful about exalting themselves. Don't rebel against the first presidency. In other words, 12, by verse 28, the 12 must purify their hearts before going into all the world to preach the gospel to every creature who has not received it. In other words, get out there. You have the keys. Joseph holds the keys. The second coming is coming. They have a huge responsibility. But have you ever noticed that in your life when you're about to get a calling, that difficulties all come? And then you get the calling and then they really come, right? But I think the Lord is mindful of us.
Isn't there a reconciliation and Thomas B. Marsh comes back at some point?
Yes. He does come back in the 50s. Thomas is rebaptized. He receives his endowment in the endowment house on Temple Square and then moves up to Ogden, where he spends his days. Let's read a couple of verses in section 112. I think it's interesting that the revelation was given to Joseph Smith. It was Thomas B. Marsh that was very concerned about it. I think it's interesting that it's received on the very day that Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde are preaching the gospel in England as they first are preaching it. So you get that crossover. But Thomas B. Marsh is actually the scribe of it. He's writing it down. So I like verse 1. Verily, thus saith the Lord unto you, my servant Thomas. So he's actually writing that. I have heard thy prayers, and thine alms have come up as a memorial before me, in behalf of those thy brethren. So he's been praying about those in his quorum, who were chosen to bear testimony of my name, and to send it abroad among all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people, and ordained through the instrumentality of my servants. I like this because Thomas has a calling. He is praying for those who are in his quorum. You know, it says to me, I teach 13, 14-year-olds at Sunday school. I need to be praying for them. Not necessarily for me to give a really great lesson, but for them to have a good life and stay true.
I notice in verse 3, you have abased yourself. Great job. I didn't have to humble you. You humbled yourself. It seems the Lord likes that kind of effort. I'm trying to humble myself.
I think the most quoted of section 12 has got to be verse 10. Be thou humble, and the Lord thy God shall lead thee by the hand and give thee answers to thy prayers.
Susan, this would be probably a good question for you and for you, John. Where do you find your humility from? Susan, you've done a lot. Yet you don't come in here saying, hey, where are my green Skittles? I need my water at 68 degrees. You come in very much like, hi, guys, let's have some fun. Where have you come by that? And John, I mean, you're as humble as I pretend to be. Both of you, tell me about humility, where you've seen it, how you've tried to emulate that.
I think that you gain humility being in a family. The world outside can cheer you on and say, oh, wow, you don't want to be just like you. Your humility comes in the home. If you can own what they think of you in the home, it can ground you better.
That will help you go, okay, maybe I'm not as perfect as everyone thinks I am. Yeah.
It sure helps to read these stories in the scriptures, doesn't it? When I think of Moses going, now I know that man is nothing, which thing I never had supposed. Why isn't that a youth conference t-shirt? Well, man is nothing, youth conference, July 2025. Why don't we have... If Moses can say that, we know enough of our own weaknesses, and we know the Lord knows them exactly. So that's why I like verse 1 back in 111. I'm not displeased, even though I've seen your follies. Thomas B. Marsh, it makes me happy to hear of these people coming back. He was invited to write a letter to the first presidency for permission to be received back into the church. So this is May 5th of 1857. I'll just read the last part, but you can find it in BYU Studies Quarterly. Thomas B. Marsh said, I know what I have done. A mission was laid upon me, and I have never filled it, and now I fear it is too late, but it is filled by another. I see the Lord could get along very well without me, and he has lost nothing by my falling out of the ranks. But oh, what have I lost? Riches, greater riches than all this world or many planets like this could afford. But oh, brethren, can you speak one word of comfort to me? Can I be saved at all in the kingdom of God? Can I find peace among you? Oh, if I can but enjoy your smiles and the smiles of the church of Jesus, I shall be content to depart or remain in so great peace. I know the Lord has been mindful of me, and although I was very stubborn, he has followed me up. He has visited me with scourging and with visions and dreams. Brethren, oh, that I were worthy to call you brethren, but what shall I call you? You run very near to me. I love you better than I do any set of mortals on this earth. You have been diligent in accomplishing the work given you, while I, miserable me, have played time away among harlot churches, only seeking for nourishment to my soul where there was no bread of life. And I love you and I hate myself. I wait here at Florence anxiously for a letter addressed to your old and now truly unworthy and truly sincere friend, signed Thomas B. Marsh. P.S. My love to all the saints, and may the richest blessings of the fullness of the everlasting gospel be with and rest upon you now and forevermore. Amen. T.B.M. Thomas B. Marsh. This article continues. Upon receiving official approval, Thomas B. Marsh was rebaptized at Papio Creek in Nebraska while en route to Salt Lake Valley by Andrew Cunningham on 16 July, 1857. So, what a letter. I'm so glad the Lord is forgiving. That's a humble heart right there.
Yeah.
In that letter, don't you think?
Oh, man, that's tough.
No, only that when he did come to Utah, he went to see Brigham Young. By this point, Thomas B. Marsh has had some really severe health problems and suffers from palsy. As Brigham seeing him after 18 years, he at first doesn't seem to recognize him. He asks Thomas to speak, and Thomas speaks, and then Brigham says, truly it is you. And eventually has Thomas come then speak to the saints there in the tabernacle. But it's interesting, Thomas came back to the church, and after his return, there will be vacancies in the Quorum of the 12.
Yeah.
But Thomas will not be reinstated.
Yeah. Susan, isn't it same for one of the Johnson brothers who returns? You said he goes to Tooele. I think he becomes a bishop.
Right. He becomes a bishop out there and a sheriff.
That Lyman or Luke?
It's Luke. But you wonder, the time out of the church, like Parley P. Pratt, doesn't seem to skip a beat. He's back in. Orson Pratt comes back in really, really quick. But the longer the time out, the less the opportunity. So it's not only what they missed being out, but then when they come back, their opportunities for service don't appear as great.
I think Luke Johnson's the only person to serve as an apostle, then a bishop. Yeah.
I think you could be right on that.
Coming up in part 2.
I had an occasion in my happy world of research. Who else has wanted to go into these libraries where you need tetanus shots to walk in? They're just out in the nowhere place. At this point, you don't see them on Google. So I decided I would follow through the lives of those on the High Council that were serving at that time that voted to not help support Joseph and his family for that year. See what happened to them. And the interesting thing I found is that